How's the royal family? I pray that everyone is doing well. Well, my royal family, this truly will be a long, necessary video. And the last video that I did, one of the jurors on the Derek Chauvin murder trial came forth. Well, what I'm going to present today.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oops. Let's put a freeze on that. Let's put a freeze on that just in case. Let me freeze this other one just in case, because some of these channels will pull that. So, anyhow, I have 3 in-depth videos. We're going to hear from the attorneys in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. We're going to hear even more in depth to that juror, and then also we're going to listen to the DA. All right, and I purposely did not watch any of these 3 videos because I wanted to give my true, authentic reaction. I may stop in between. I may let it flow. I just don't know. I'm a freestyler over here. But I felt like this was quite necessary because we always want to get more insight. All right, my royal family, let's go on this journey.
All right, gentlemen, congratulations on a guilty verdict and a job well done on the Chauvin trial. I don't know if anybody's pointed this out yet, but the jury deliberated for just over 9 hours and 29 minutes. When you heard they came to a verdict in that amount of time in such a big case, did you feel pretty good going into the reading of the verdict?
Yeah, I think we did. It was, they hadn't asked any questions.
Mm-hmm.
There were no requests for information. And, they received the case fairly late in the day, on the first day, and then hadn't been deliberating really that long. And so I think both of us felt pretty good going in.
Cautiously optimistic
Exactly.
that it looked pretty good. In that amount of time, they really had not had much time to have robust arguments about a great deal. So we figured they must have been pretty much on the same page. And I didn't see it likely that they would have come out with just a blanket acquittal in that amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard any feedback from any of the jurors who served in this?
No, well, other than what anybody else would have seen just on television from
Right.
an alternate who has made some comments.
Right. So backing up then, can you both share, Attorney General Keith Ellison called you, asked you to be on this case. What goes through your head? Does it matter who else is on it? What are the kind of considerations you put into it when deciding to do this?
Well, that's a good question. Who else is on it? And did you know who else was going to be on it?
I had no idea who else was on it.
I had no idea either. I'd never met Jerry before.
Right.
Really?
I'd never met Mr. Ellison. I'd never met the Attorney General before he called me. He called and asked if I would provide assistance with the case, and my first thought was yes. The Attorney General of the state called and asked for help, and you should do that.
Mm-hmm.
If the Attorney General calls you. I've certainly have been privileged to serve the state in different capacities as a prosecutor before, and justice is important, policing is important to me, and so that was what went through my mind, and asked who else was on the team. Very pleasant to be able to then come away from this meeting somebody who I have great respect and admiration for his work and consider a friend that I gained from this.
Mm-hmm.
No, likewise, and in fact, I have described myself in this case as an alligator in a saltwater crocodile pond, because I've come from a different environment altogether. So I had
Meaning mostly civil and so forth?
Yeah,
Okay.
exclusively civil.
Yeah.
And so I've never been involved in a criminal case. So when I got the phone call, I'd already seen the video and had a reaction to the video that this is one of these moments kind of in history. There's a time for every person. when you see something that so shocks your conscience, you feel this is the time to stand up and be counted. And that video was my moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I had thought I want to do whatever I can in support of justice with respect to this. And out of the blue, the phone call comes from the Attorney General. And the only two lawyers I knew were the Attorney General, who I'd known for some years, and Lola Velasquez Aguilu. And the rest of the team, I had no idea who they were, how many they were, where they'd be coming from. Had never heard of a Steve Slicher, let alone been able to spell his name. and simply just agreed to serve this way. You know, I try cases on the civil side, and I was asked to be involved because I try cases in different parts of the country, and the Attorney General thought the skill set might be useful.
You know, one aspect of that our viewers latched on to is the pro bono aspect. Why do a pro bono?
Well, again, it harkens back to my other answer to do it pro bono, because this was purely a service, in my view. It wasn't about any degree of enrichment for myself or the law firm. It was a service to the people, a service to equal justice, a service to the meaning of the rule of law in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it would be helpful to the state if they had to pay fewer individuals.
Yeah.
It makes it possible to offer a more robust form of justice.
Yeah.
So I agreed that I would do it pro bono, as did Mr. Slicher. You know.
And this is what we're supposed to do as attorneys. Attorneys in Minnesota, you know, we have a fantastic tradition of attorneys in Minnesota stepping up and doing pro bono work. It's what we're supposed to do. And my firm has been involved in a lot of pro bono work over the years, and they were completely supportive. It's a responsibility that we have because we're in a profession. It's a privilege to be in this profession. It's a wonderful profession, the practice of law. To be able to make a living serving others in the practice of law it's a blessing. And so this is what we're supposed to do.
This was a learning experience for a lot of our viewers who watch. I mean, we aired every single day of the trial on TV live on Channel 11. So, you know, a lot. I mean, sometimes I would get too complicated and have to take a step back, and people are like, well, how much time does it take to put together a case like this?
Oh my. Yeah. Tremendous amounts of time and sweat and muscle. I think we started our regular meetings in June of last year, and we were then having multiple planning preparation meetings a week.
Thank you so much for joining us, and
right
thank you for your
time.
here.
So if you can,
it's been a week now. I'm sure that the family of George
Let's
Floyd
freeze this for just a minute, my royal family.
You want to say to them,
I'm going to freeze this all the way.
first of
Excuse
all,
me for that.
You were in the courtroom when they read the guilty verdict. Yes, sir.
I'm going to freeze both of these, and they keep popping up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two down, because that's just how this site is set up. I hope this didn't throw anyone off, but I'm even curious. Like I said, this is the first time I'm listening to it. So we 6 minutes into it. Forgive me, my royal family. Let's continue to roll.
A weekly all-hands meeting, plus we had then individual projects we're working on in prosecution of the matter, which was additional kind of hours every week in the planning for the prosecution of this. So if you add that up, that was generally how much time, with the idea that the month or two before trial, it's what you did for life.
Right.
You know, eat, breathe, sleep.
You dream about the case.
Correct, dream about the case. And,
I mean, you wake up in the middle of a conversation with a witness, but you know, but it was a dream.
Right.
No, you're working all of the time, because that's what it takes to put a case together. With the sole burden of proof, right?
Yep.
You know, we have the burden of proof, and there are a lot of witnesses and a lot of things to cover. And so it took a lot. It took a lot of work. It took all of us.
So one more question on the setup of stuff. How do you prevent it from becoming a too many cooks in the kitchen situation where you're all talented, you all have different legal backgrounds, and I would assume you're all proud people, and how do you stop the headbutting from inevitably occurring?
The Attorney General. I mean, he is, you know, there's two parts to that title, the attorney and the general, right? And he is tactically a very good attorney. and really was the person who constructed the order of witnesses and our strategy, both legally and presentation-wise. But very much in general, we had a division of labor, we had accountability, we had redundancy. We put together a plan and we executed the plan. That's how we did it. And also, just in terms of working together within that structure, we began to see each other and understand. Jerry's very talented at what he does. I enjoy practicing law. I love being in trial. This is what I do. And to see someone else at the top of their craft like that, I'm not going to fight with that, right? It's an opportunity of a lifetime to work with some very talented people. So we didn't have a lot of that headbutting because there was a respect that developed.
Robust debate, robust discussion on any number of issues, and that was just a constant. But if a call had to be made, then you knew who made the call. And once it was made, you lined and you march on.
Could each of you share which witness in this trial stuck with you the most, as well as which witness, it might be a different one, was the most important to earning the conviction?
Well, I'll let you start with that.
Sure. I've been asked that question before, and for me, it wasn't a single witness, right? It was the whole piece. I talk about us having a plan. We had a plan, right? We had a plan, we developed the plan, we executed the plan. It was important that all of the components come together, the bystanders, right? The law enforcement piece, the medical piece, and just watching all of that work together, every single part of it. For me, that's what I was enjoying the most, I guess, to the extent you can enjoy something like this, just to see it all kind of come together. But not a particular, not a one witness for me. It was really just watching the whole thing unfold.
And for me, I thought they were all important. So I agree with what Steve has said, and I would not point to any of them as a witness that we could have done without, and certainly amongst the expert ranks. But when I think about winning what I call the hearts and the minds both of jurors, heart-wise, I mean, you couldn't listen to Charles McMillan and I think have any element of humanness in you and not resonate to the genuine pain, the expressions of caring and anguish that he expressed from the stand, from Mr. McMillan. I think just won the hearts at any notion that these bystanders were an unruly mob, an uncaring group of violent of humanity. They weren't that. You can see this is a caring individual that even a year after the fact is still racked with remorse, in tears over a person he didn't even know. So I think he overall won hearts. And then for the minds of the jurors, it's a trial where our theory of how this occurred is that Mr. Floyd died of low oxygen. Dr. Tobin, I think, was the witness who could actually talk with the jurors about what was the quantity of oxygen in his lungs, what were his reserves, and was it enough to sustain life for anyone? So to that extent, I thought Dr. Tobin won the minds.
Absolutely. This all played out. I mean, everybody knows Charles McMillan now because this was on TV. It was televised and streamed around the world. How did that change the way you guys did your jobs? And do you have a different appreciation for cameras in the courts than you did before, or what's your take on that? I asked the Attorney General about it. The state fought the cameras.
It didn't affect the way we did our job any more than it would affect the way you go shopping at Target, right? There's cameras all over the place, and the cameras were unobtrusive. I get very focused when I'm in trial. I don't think about other things at all, and so for me personally, it wasn't something that was on my mind. I was doing a job, and that presentation was not for the broader TV viewing audience. That was for the jurors. Those are that was our audience. As far as cameras in the courtroom, I think that there are certainly pros and cons. On the pro side, a lot of people learned a lot, right? And there's transparency, and I think that that's important. There's certainly an educational component. For the cons, I think that it can be very difficult. You think about witnesses who by no choice of their own, became witnesses to something that was shocking and horrific, and then they're subpoenaed to testify, and then as a part of that, they're going to be broadcast all over. And I think that can be really tough. I also think it can be difficult in a world where we have this sort of anonymous ability to say really terrible things about each other online without consequence, right? And seeing some comments directed at witnesses that I thought were unfair and just mean was disappointing.
Sure.
I agree with everything Steve said in that regard. There wasn't, for me, much of a consciousness of the cameras in the courtroom. The courtroom itself was such a different environment than what we're used to seeing, with the plexiglass everywhere, there not being the typical jury box. The cameras were themselves tucked away. They weren't in your face, they weren't on the floor. So there wasn't much of awareness of it. Otherwise, I was self-conscious in the way anybody might be. I mean, if you thought for a second that when you sit down at home for dinner, the whole world's going to watch you, you might pass on dinner as opposed to having those mashed potatoes. And so we had sort of that degree of awareness that anything you do, somebody from Poland is writing to you about it. Mm-hmm. But after you kind of get into what you're doing in the courtroom, yeah, you didn't really pay any attention.
Derek Chauvin chose not to testify. Who was ready to cross-examine him, and how would that have gone if he chose to testify?
We were, but especially Mr. Slicher.
And of course, I mean, it's his constitutional right to not testify. We bear the sole burden of proof. But we were prepared for every aspect of this case, that being one of them. I was prepared to cross-examine him, and, I guess we just leave it at that.
You had permission from the judge to go into 2 prior incidents that involved Derek Chauvin, and you chose not to go into them during this trial. Why was that?
Because what this case was about 9 minutes and 29 seconds, just like Jerry said in the opening and just like we said in the closing. Other prior instances of misconduct or even just showing knowledge of the right way to do the job, those are good, but really what this case was about what happened on the ground, that restraint on the ground, that unauthorized and excessive use of force. And so we decided to keep the main thing the main thing.
Now let's stop here for a minute, my royal family. So you got 2 lawyers that did this case pro bono. And what is obvious is the black man don't really want to answer anything. He wants Esau to continue to lead, and then he'll say, well, I agree with him. All right. I'm just learning as they speak that they had the judge allowed them to bring in 2 prior bad acts. Now Esau gonna sit up here and explain why they did not use all of their arsenal in this war. You remember what I was saying, my royal family? They always give them a way out, an inkling, possibly. There ain't no way in hell what he getting ready to say gonna make any damn sense. You had an opportunity. And with that opportunity, that could have further gave even, which we already know, but that would have further dirtied him up. That would have further, because we can't get too excited over here when we hearing, because the judge ain't really rendered the truest verdict, the sentencing. So we got a judge that we know, that I know for sure, kept damn near saying this could possibly be a mistrial. So he allowed in 2 prior bad acts. And there have been well over 17. We know this. So let's hear Esau, because this so-called brother don't got no real backbone. White explain why they didn't use what they use.
How do you find out about all the motions before the trial started, and I think there were 17 total that you had identified.
Wow.
Or even more.
We just review records, you know, during the course of an investigation, you get search warrants, you obtain records of agencies and whatnot, you know, comb through the files. But I have no comment on any of those past instances.
Okay. So, from talk a little bit about the strategy here. Are there different ways that this case could have been tried in general?
Okay, let me stop. I gotta stop because I'm done. I'm outdone. So we already know about some of his prior bad acts. And again, you don't have no opinion. You could have used what you could have used in your arsenal, and you have no opinion about this filthy, murderous pig who beats the dog shit out of 14-year-old kids and make their ears bleed. And then this coon over here, he gonna follow suit. Check the play, my royal family.
Could you explain, maybe an example, and explain why you tried it the way that you did?
Always different ways you can try a case, and there are different ways it can be tried, and they will all be effective too. But the strategy here was primarily crafted, driven by the Attorney General. I mean, it was a huge strategic decision, for example, as to where and when do we start to tell the story. Do you tell it chronologically? On May 25th, he went to Cup Foods at 7 o'clock p.m. and so on, and bring it forward? Or do you start it in the middle of the action, you know, the 9 to 9? Mm-hmm. And we figured, let us first define the main thing, which was the 9 to 9, and then focus on keeping the main thing the main thing. And that was a strategic decision early on, and that we started there in the subdual and restraint on the ground, and we essentially panned the camera back from there temporally to see what happened earlier in the day, and then to bring the jurors and the audience forward from there. But that was a strategic call in how to tell our story. What's the narrative?
Anything to add to that?
No, I agree with what Jerry said.
Yeah.
And we felt it effective. And again, part of that whole overall strategy, what was the crime here? Right? What was the crime? The crime was the restraint on the ground. That was the crime.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't able to see the jurors except for the pool reporters that were in the courtroom each day, which is a unique way to cover a trial. You guys looked at the jurors every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Was this jury afraid to acquit Derek Chauvin because of the possibility of protesters coming to their house if it was the verdict that the protesters didn't want?
I think the answer to that's no, but even in the jury selection, I mean, if some juror felt that way and didn't feel that they could render a fair and impartial judgment, they could have held up a hand, and very few had any difficulties getting off the jury if they didn't want to serve in this trial, as you may have noticed from the jury selection. So they took an oath and committed to decide the case on evidence and not be swayed by any of those kinds of considerations, and I believe they did it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and particularly because we presented overwhelming evidence of guilt and no reasonable person could see it any other way. And so I don't think that they decided this case based on any sort of external factors. There's a presumption in the law that the jurors follow the judge's instructions, and I don't think that there's any evidence that they were influenced by anything on the outside.
What did you see on the jurors' faces every day?
Attentiveness. They took copious notes. They were very much tuned into the testimony. They didn't emote, as in you didn't hear exclamations or guffaws or any of that. But you could see that they were all kind of very tuned in. It wasn't like some trials I've been in where there are certain jurors who are sleeping a good part of it, or they take turns sleeping for parts of it. Really, none of that to speak of in any significant way from this jury. So I thought it was an attentive jury, a smart jury, and I saw them taking lots of notes.
It was somber. I mean, during COVID, we get used to just seeing each other's eyes because everybody's masked, and it did. They were leaned forward, they were locked in, taking notes, but it was a very somber. I think everybody was taking this very seriously, as juries tend to do. I mean, I practiced as a prosecutor for over 2 decades, done a lot of jury trials, and I think that the juries, everybody says they don't want to be on jury service, and they're always so proud that they did it, and so glad that they did it after. I think they take their job very seriously.
Yeah, just as a brief aside, during the breaks when we would have to do the commentary and stuff on TV, I would wait for that pool note to come from the pool reporter and be like, okay, I got the pool note. Juror number 14 is taking notes. Juror number 3 is taking notes. And so it never was as dramatic, like what you would expect. Like Juror 3 cried out, or it was not.
Right.
It was taking notes just about sums up what I heard.
That was about it.
So, a technical question. We did a lot of talking about the charges, and the second-degree murder charge was added on just a little bit after the initial charges that Derek Chauvin faced. And a lot of people were wondering whether that assault portion could be proved in this case, which it was. Can you give me any insight into, how this second-degree murder charge was brought into the mix, and how it was thought, we can prove this?
Now, actually, that decision was made by the Attorney General before either of us were brought in to the charging decision. In our own discussions of the law and the legal theories going forward, and the Attorney General told me on the phone that was what the charge was going to be. And in my experience, I considered it for a moment and thought to myself, well, that's exactly the right charge. I mean, an unauthorized use of force is in fact an assault, causing loss of consciousness, a substantial bodily harm. That's assault 3, and it just made a lot of sense. Then communicating that, like being able to teach the jury what the law requires and show how the facts fit into those elements, that can be challenging because it's just different. It's not a complicated concept, but it's just different from how you typically think of murder. But I thought the charge fit very well. And we also thought it was important that the jury have different options to choose from, to be able to consider the same conduct in different legal frameworks.
I think this is probably the last question. Well, first, let me do 2 more. The video, particularly Darnella's video, was the video that millions and millions and millions of people have seen. And obviously there was a lot of decisions to be made about how you presented it. And don't play it too much that the jury gets desensitized to it. Can you talk a little bit about what you felt was appropriate as far as this video and how important of a piece of evidence it was?
It was a centrally, critically important piece of evidence. As you remember, I played it in an opening statement and simply played it. It was best, in my view, to, and the teams as well, to simply play it in its natural native state, just as is, with very little lawyer commentary, interpretation, spin, or speak. And that it pretty much spoke for itself, that persons of ordinary sensibilities would see that video and have the reaction that there was something gravely wrong that happened there. And that's the central focus and point of our case. We did have the concern that jurors might get desensitized to it, seeing it too much, but on the other hand, given all the times we had seen it, every time we would see it, it would do something to you every single time. It's just that stark. And so we didn't want to overplay it, but what we found was interesting is that when you bring experts in to then focus on specific aspects of it, there are things that you didn't notice when you're watching the video. You didn't notice a foot is completely off the ground. You didn't notice the shimmying that takes place until it slowed down and you really focused. And we felt that was going to be okay to draw the jurors' attention to specific things in the video, but to play it in toto, not that often that they will see snippets of it throughout the whole trial.
One day that was particularly tough, I think, was when we had our witness up, our foundational witness, and we played all the body camera videos back to back. That was a difficult day, I think, for everyone. Difficult day for the jurors as well. It must have been. But we had to do that to show all of the different perspectives and angles of this incident, from the perspective of the officers wearing the cameras, from the perspective of the street far back, and how they all related to each other. After that day, when we got through that day, we really didn't play the whole thing again. It was just certain segments because we believed that they had enough. I think they've seen it. And now we can just focus in on particular parts. But desensitized, no. Every time we watched it.
And so just to get on the record, Jerry thought of the You Can Believe Your Eyes theme for the prosecution?
Yeah, I wouldn't own that as simply a Jerry creation, because the themes were really sort of collectively come about with our discussions in the team. The role that I had with the team initially was to work on the narrative and the themes. But we vetted them, we kicked them around, and we saw which ones really resonate with the facts we have. So I couldn't own that as much as I'd like to.
Jerry was the first one to say that, right? In our meetings, that came out of his mouth first, and it did resonate with the team, because that really was what the case was about, was just providing the jury the assurance that they could believe their eyes, that what they saw was wrong, and the wrongfulness is what killed George Floyd. And that's why we called the police officers and the experts in law enforcement to assure them that yes, you're seeing what you're seeing, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And to call the medical experts to give them the assurance that, of course, you see this and think to yourself, that must have killed him. And that's exactly what they told the jury, that they could do that. And it was really just sort of an assurance of that first video that we played.
So last question, you've both had accomplished careers before taking this call, but where does this case now stand for each of you?
It's not over.
Right.
I'd say first, it's not over. It has been to me a wonderful service. We didn't go out to engage in celebrations and that sort of thing afterward, because what happened here really was and is a tragedy in the true sense of the word, and there are no winners in a tragedy. So you don't, to me, go out for those kinds of celebrations, even if, as a society, we positively benefit from lessons learned, or if it propels us forward in a positive direction. So I think where it takes us in the near term is looking toward the next set of trials in August, and wanting to complete the job. So that's where my focus is now, is in trying to complete this process of justice, and it won't be completed until we've addressed the other officers who were involved on that day on May 25th.
Well, I agree with Jerry. I mean, we just need to focus on the task ahead, and then just as far as when all of it's over, I mean, the practice of law it's a privilege, and it's taken me in places that I never thought I would be, and we'll just wait for the next thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Decided specifically what sentence to ask Judge Cahill for when Derek Chauvin is sentenced in June?
No, we haven't. The Attorney General has been clear that the state is not seeking revenge.
Correct.
Right? They're seeking a reasonable sentence. And, sentencing a person is probably the most difficult thing, the most difficult decision a judge has to make. And so Judge Cahill, has a tough job ahead of him.
There's a few things that resonates within me listening to this full interview. And what hit me was, let's always keep in mind, my royal family, that when the enemy do what Chauvin did, the first thing that the enemy do is always try to find a way out. They have looked at that footage repeatedly, and they could not find a way out for him. But they still, even during that trial, even how certain things that we heard so far, there was still an inkling of, is there a way we can get him out at the end of the day? Can we get him out? And the enemy can do the most atrocious thing to the royal family. And they're going to try to find some way to humanize him. Now they're talking about, when you start throwing up, well, what about, the sentencing? Well, we're not seeking revenge. Well, I'm seeking fucking revenge because again and again, every millisecond, somebody always doing something nefarious to the royal family. So don't come to me with that BS. All right. We're going to get into video number 2, and we're going to get more in depth with the juror, which is Brian Mitchell.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your service on this jury.
Absolutely.
It's been a week now. I'm sure that if the family of George Floyd is watching this, I'm sure there's probably something that you want to say to them. What would you say to the family of George Floyd?
Yeah, well, first I would want to send my condolences to them and just let them know that even though they lost a loved one, he's become a martyr now, a legend. He's become something bigger than any individual person could ever be. What his name means is hopefully going to become synonymous with change and with reform and all different things that have become very positive.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it has been a week. How are you doing?
After now that it's been about a week, I'm good now. The first few days were rough. I had to take some time to just do nothing, just to recover, to decompress, and just get back to myself. It felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and now I'm starting to feel good again.
It had to be just mentally and emotionally draining.
It was extremely stressful, extremely stressful. There were days where I didn't know if I wanted to go back in to the courtroom the next day, where I was just sitting at home like, do I really want to do this? And I really had to talk myself into making it in.
All right. Well, we haven't heard the perspective yet of somebody who was in that deliberation room. Kind of take us in there and set the scene. How did it begin?
So when we first got there, that first day after the closing arguments, we come into the room. We kind of voted on a 4-person. Then we went straight after manslaughter and voted on that, did like a preliminary vote. And one person was still kind of unknown at that part. They didn't know, which way they wanted to go. So we kind of went around the room, talked about how we all felt and, why we felt that way. Then we re-voted again and we kind of came to terms on the manslaughter. And then we kind of called it a day at that point and came back in the next morning to go over 3rd-degree murder and 2nd-degree.
So when it comes to a 4-person, how do you select who that person is and what do they do?
So we just did a vote. We just, everybody that wanted to be the 4-person, we had them put their name in, and we just went around the room and took a roundabout vote. And whoever had the most votes, that's who we went with.
Mm-hmm. And what is the job of a 4-person?
So they just kind of led the discussions. They would keep tally of the votes. They were just kind of, I guess, the captain of the jury team, if you will.
At the end of the first day, you said that you pretty much had decided on the manslaughter being guilty. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So manslaughter was decided day 1 in about an hour.
So then going into day 2, which one do you go into first? Do you go into 2nd degree or 3rd degree specifically?
Yeah, so we came right away in the morning and went after 3rd degree. We had a few discussions on that. That probably took the longest. That probably took about 3 hours to just discuss, just based on the language of how it's written and make sure we all understand what it is exactly. And after that, 2nd-degree murder, we kind of got through that pretty quickly on our votes on that. We all kind of knew where we stood. We all went over the evidence. We didn't need to go over much more else, so we were able to knock that out.
And when you go over the evidence, did you watch any of the videos in the deliberation room, or how did that all go?
Yeah, so we watched actually all the body cams. We watched a couple of cell phone videos, and we went over a few of the trainings that were given to us as part of the exhibit. So we went over quite a few things in high detail.
Was there anything, because you're not allowed to talk about it during the case, but you watch those videos over and over and over. When you watch them with your jury peers, did they give you anything that you didn't notice before, or how did kind of the group discussion about it go?
I don't think there was anything I didn't notice, but everybody definitely pointed out different things from each person's perspective. So we all thought different things were crucial periods of time for each of us. So the one thing that we all agreed on, though, was the last breath that we had. Dr. Chauvin said the last breath was at a specific time. We all agreed that that was possibly the last breath, and that was kind of the perspective where it's like, okay, we're all the same on that point. and what other points are we possibly similar on.
Was it relevant to you how long this knee to the neck lasted after that last breath?
Yeah, that was a major point within the deliberation room. Major point. I think all of us agreed that after that point, it was just unnecessary. Up until then, there was the discussions on what was necessary, what wasn't. But after that, I think we all were in conclusion that it was just unnecessary after that in general.
Basically, it was debatable up to a certain point. I mean, some
Right.
people, I'm
Yes.
sure, thought that. I mean, you all bring different perspectives into the
Yes.
jury room. Some people probably. Did you think that that it should have ended earlier even than that?
Yes, absolutely. I thought it should have ended way earlier. But the one thing that we all agreed on was that at some point it became unlawful and unnecessary and excessive. And at that point going forward is when it became just extreme.
Do jury discussions become heated?
Nah, I don't think any of them were heated just because we had spent so much time together and we weren't far off from the same point. Mm-hmm. We were all kind of saying the same thing, but in different ways from different perspectives. But we all had the same idea at the end of the day. It just was spoken differently from different people.
How many people were kind of on the fence or weren't quite there yet?
I would say for sure at least one, maybe two, possibly three, as we're going through it. But like I said, it wasn't like they were necessarily on the fence. They just needed more clarification as to they just wanted to be sure. They wanted to do their due diligence and be sure. So they, some people are faster, some people are slower. You can't be. I don't knock them for wanting to take their time on a big decision like this.
Yeah, we talked a lot here about the elements. I mean, you
yeah.
listened to this entire trial. You didn't. You maybe knew what the charges were, but you didn't know all these little details that needed to be proven, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
What's that like to kind of tackle that after everything you've listened to?
I thought that was kind of cool. So they give you the instructions, and it has all the elements listed for each charge. You just think back over the trial and be like, well, this checks this off, this checks that off. We literally just used it as a checklist, and just went through, and we would present different evidences and different exhibits, and just say, well, this is what satisfies this element, and then move on to the next.
Where was your mind at right when deliberation started?
So when it very first started, I thought we'd be in and out rather quickly. I thought it would take maybe an hour. I thought we were all pretty much on the same page. Even though we hadn't discussed it, I just got the vibe that we pretty much were. And I was pretty sure we'd be in and out. So it actually took longer than what I expected.
Sure. And for those that needed more time, what specifically were they saying? What did they need?
They just wanted to be sure on once again the elements. It was a specific element, and they just wanted to be sure they understood it correctly, and that they were applying it correctly, how it should be, how it was written, how it was applied.
Do you remember which element that was?
It was part of the third-degree murder. It might have been the first part of the element. I'm not sure which element it was, but it was part of third-degree murder. Just the way it was written out, it was a little bit confusing.
That's known as being the most confusing law.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, so that's the one that hung us up for quite some time. Where, we just had to break it down, and everybody went around just kind of expressing how they thought it was read.
Mm-hmm. And so you deliberated not at the courthouse.
Correct.
You were at the hotel, basically?
Correct. Yep,
What did that situation feel like? I mean, you know how big this was, and you probably know there's a reason you're not at the courthouse, for example, and things are, in the courtroom, things were socially distanced. There's a lot of things that were different about this. How did that whole situation feel to you?
I mean, it felt like you're getting chauffeured around by the Secret Service, and you're just, this top secret or this top tier agent or something like that. You're getting moved around everywhere by 2 or 3 deputies, security's everywhere. But it made you feel safe, though. It made you feel like, wow, they're taking the proper precautions to keep you safe. Therefore, let's just do the right thing.
Yeah. And what was the racial makeup of this jury?
Extremely diverse. So there was me, which I'm African American. There was another African American woman, 2 men of African descent, 2 mixed young ladies. I believe there was 3 or 4 older white women, and 2, maybe 30, mid-20s white men, and everybody was, super nice people. So it was really nice to see such a diverse, I guess, cast or group, and all be able to come together and come to the same conclusion.
The killing of George Floyd set off racial discussions, racial protests involving racial justice and so forth. And then in the courtroom, the defense attorney said, this case is not about race. When you think about the entire thing and how the trial was presented, how much was it about race?
I can't say that it necessarily was about race because, I mean, the facts have nothing to do with race. The facts are the facts. But looking at it from a black man, from my perspective, I see myself within George Floyd. I see my family, my brothers within George Floyd. So from that aspect, it has a lot. But in terms of just the case, it's just the facts.
Right, but that perspective is important, and a lot of different perspectives are important to bring into a jury room.
Yeah.
Did any discussions stem from experiences that different people had based on their race and their background?
No, I think we actually steered clear of that and wanted to stay just to the facts of what was being presented. Just because, like you said, once you step outside of the facts, it's up to perspective and up to your own life experiences. And if there's things you have not experienced, you might not even understand. So it's best to kind of, in my opinion, to steer clear of that when dealing with something so delicate, where you can just base it off the facts and you don't even need to go that route.
Did you feel any sort of weight because you were the only African-American male juror?
Yeah, I definitely, that was stressful alone. But because of that, I felt like it was my duty to be there, not only to do the right thing, but to be as a representative for my community and as a guy that deals with young black men. I felt like it's important for me to be there and be that model, that visual representation of what should be right.
And you're a basketball coach at Minneapolis North, which has a long tradition of great basketball teams. You're influencing young men. What kind of discussions are you going to have once, they're all finding out now that you were a juror?
Yeah, for me, the discussions I'm going to have with them is just about staying positive and being able to be themselves and be themselves unapologetically. As black men, a lot of times we're told that we have to act a certain way or be a certain way in order to fit whatever the norm should be or whatever, or to interact with police a certain way. I want to be able to tell them that you can be yourself and it's okay. You can wear your hat however you want to wear your hat or whatever. You can be you, and that shouldn't be a death wish. I shouldn't have to tell them that to be careful because depending on how you walk, it could be a death wish. So I want to be able to tell them that they can be free to do whatever they please in terms of who they are.
During this trial, there were a few things that came up, and we had no idea whether you knew about them or not. The first one was the $27 million settlement from the city of Minneapolis to George Floyd's family. Was that something that you had heard about at all?
No, not at all. I still, even to now, don't know any of the details on that, just because I have no idea.
And then there was the death of Dante Wright. He was shot by a police officer in Brooklyn Center. Really can't avoid knowing about that, could you?
You couldn't avoid knowing, but the details of that, once again, I didn't really know. As I'm finding out more and more and more, but we did know that a shooting had happened. I knew it was a young black man and it was a police shooting, but I didn't know the details or exactly how the community was reacting. I assumed there'd be protests, but I didn't know to what magnitude.
Did it have any effect on you or other jurors that you know of?
No, I don't think it did at all. Not that I know of. Like I said, we were so focused on the case, and the stress of the trial alone was just so much. It's just like you don't wanna get engulfed in more negative news, because every day you're coming in and you're watching somebody die every day, over and over again on instant replay. That alone is stressful enough for any human being, where you don't want to see anything else. You're drained at the end of the day. You just want to go home and possibly go to sleep or whatever you do. It's too much to even worry about the news or what's going on or want to hear anything more negative.
Speaking of those videos, how much of an impact did that have on you to watch George Floyd die so many different times from so many different angles?
Yeah, it was tough on me, extremely tough. There was a weekend, maybe after the second week of trial, where I just broke down, and it was just like, I don't know if I could do this anymore. It 100% had a strain on me emotionally just constantly seeing that and constantly hearing the different testimonies. It was rough.
When I interviewed the prosecutors the other day, Jerry Blackwell said that as a prosecutor, he wanted to win the hearts and the minds of the jurors. Which witnesses would you say won your heart, meaning you made a connection, and it was a connection that was important to the case, perhaps on an emotional level, but also, having an impact toward the verdict?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So I actually connected emotionally most with George Floyd's brother. Just the stories he was telling, along with the pictures of them as kids and stuff like that. It reminded me of me and my siblings 100%. And I felt like that easily, like this could be us. That's 100% what I said in my mind. I connected so very much with them on that. Yeah, it was unreal. And that day that he spoke, and I even shed a few tears, and I had to hide from the media. And it was a rough time at that point.
Yeah. Any of the other earlier witnesses have a similar emotional impact on you? And when I say emotional, it's not just, emotional doesn't win cases, but it was emotion along with facts of the case as well.
Yeah, so another person, I thought he set the tone. I wouldn't say it invoked any emotion in me, but when Donald Williams spoke, I felt like he set a good tone to start the trial out. I thought that was a great way to begin the trial, and it just kind of carried on throughout. I thought the other witnesses they followed his suit. So
right, and did he give you a different way to look at that video than you had previously not looked at it before? Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. He gave a perspective that I don't think any of us had looked at yet. Where he just flipped the script and it just set, like I said, it set a different tone. Where it was like, oh, okay, well, this is a little different. He made us feel it, so we felt it.
Then Jerry Blackwell talked about winning the minds of the jurors, and I think what he means by that is witnesses who prove the case. Yeah. Well, this is why he's guilty. Yeah. Which witnesses won your mind?
Yeah, there was no question. It was Dr. Chauvin. When he got on the stand, and his entire testimony was just, to me, it was just phenomenal because he broke everything down scientifically, but in a way that was easy to understand, easy to follow, and easy to even take notes on, to even refer back to. Mm-hmm. And it just made, it was like, to me, it was like that's the period at the end of the sentence where it's like, wow, I don't know how the defense would be able to come back from that, because that was really good.
Right. So then, just to make it a little more broad, what struck you the most during this trial?
I would say the fact that the defense never had like an aha moment. I know that was something I was kind of waiting on, like, well, it's got to be coming soon, where it's like, oh, at some point they're going to say boom, and it's going to be like, oh, wow, now which way are we going to go now that they have this damning evidence or something, and it just never happened. Yeah, it just never. I'm pretty sure the other jurors were probably waiting on the same thing.
Well, it shows that you had an open mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there anything that tilted toward the defense?
The opening statement I thought was really strong by them. Mm-hmm. I thought they sounded very prepared and ready. And like I said, that peak moment just never happened.
Mm-hmm. Derek Chauvin sat pretty close to you in the courtroom across from you. What was that like?
Well, so where he was, I could just see his face, with the mask on, and then there was like where the attorneys would stand was kind of right there, kind of blocking him a little bit. So I couldn't see him too often, but when I could, it seemed like he was pretty confident those first few weeks, just within his stance, and just his eyes, they just seemed pretty confident. I feel like it began to deteriorate as the case went on, and as things just started to shift. I feel like as their case got weaker, I could read it on his face.
Could you pinpoint the moment that happened, or the witness that it was?
No, I think it was a gradual thing. It was definitely a gradual thing. I will say by the last week, it was pretty obvious that they were a little nervous over there.
Now, you saw him in his actions on all these videos, of course.
Yes.
What's your impression of Derek Chauvin based on what you learned through these videos and through these witnesses who testified?
It's hard. I don't know if I have a direct impression of him, because I've never heard him say a word really besides whatever he said on the video. Mm-hmm. So I can't give an impression necessarily of him. Yeah, there's no way I could.
Yeah, that's fair. If he had testified, What could he have said that would have made a difference?
That I don't know. He would have to. I don't know if there's anything he could have said. They would have had to come with just a little bit stronger of a defense in general. Yeah, I don't think there's anything he could have said in my mind that would have changed it. But it would have been just, I guess, nice to hear for the impression aspect of who he is. But I don't think anything would have changed.
Did it make a difference to you and other jurors that he didn't testify?
I don't think it made a difference. I don't know if it would have changed the verdict or not. But I mean, I think it's human nature to be curious as to just to see, well, what just ask questions. What were you thinking, or what was your thought process? The curiosity, I think, is human nature, but I don't know if that would have actually changed the verdict at all.
During jury selection, you shared with the attorneys your basic impression of what you knew about what happened. How did that change as the trial played out and you learned all the facts?
Well, like I knew so little at the beginning. So my first time watching the entire video was during the trial. And I mean, upon watching it and watching all the different angles, I mean, my impression was just like, I don't know what the defense is going to do. I mean, that's just what it was. Like, I don't know if they have something that's going to prove outside of this that this was not a murder. Then wow, because I mean, yeah. So I don't know. I thought the evidence was damning against them once I finally seen everything, and it just is what it is.
And was there any? I mean, so the videos were obviously the big evidence.
Yes, of course. That's the marquee evidence. So that, along with the testimonies of, like I said, so like Dr. Chauvin and the force experts, those two things coupled together, I didn't see an avenue for them to go.
What had a bigger impact on you, the national use of force experts, or like the Minneapolis police officers who testified against Sheldon?
I think a mixture of both. So, so the officers for sure going over their specific trainings, but then also the national force expert going over, well, I mean, giving their perspective from even a broader point of view, where it's like, no, some of the stuff is still just, it's not okay.
Yeah.
And with all that coupled together, it just didn't look good.
Right. What were your impressions of the attorneys, the key attorneys in the room, and the judge?
Yeah. The judge was great. I thought he did a great job. I thought he was phenomenal. I like the fact that he definitely took his time to protect us as jurors. Whatever we needed, he was willing to do, and still is to this day. I mean, with keeping everybody's name anonymous and leaving it up to the individual jurors. If you want to come forward, as I am, then you can. But whoever doesn't, he'll keep it anonymous for as long as he can. I think that's phenomenal. And then on both sides, I thought all the attorneys did a really good job. In general, I thought they did exceptionally well throughout the entire trial.
On social media and so forth, there's some people who say, yeah, of course they voted guilty. They were afraid of what was going to happen if they acquitted him. They were afraid of protesters coming to their house. Did outside forces have any impact on your decision?
Not even kind of. Not a little bit. Not at all. I think that is the most ridiculous thing ever when people say that, just because, one, we're all just citizens that were called to jury duty. We took time out of our everyday lives to do the right thing. And then on top of that, we're sitting in a courtroom every day dealing with such negative energy by watching this video over and over again. We don't have time to even worry about what outside might do. That's just not something that's of our concern as we're watching a human being die every day. That wouldn't even be human nature. We would have to be, we'd have to be pretty off to be able to just dismiss that we've been watching this all day and think about something like that.
Yeah.
That's not human nature.
Do you get the impression the other jurors were on the same page as you as far as that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we were all drained every day, for sure.
Are you aware that the other 3 officers are standing trial in August? They're scheduled to right now anyway?
Yes.
Based on what you saw in this trial, do you think they're guilty too?
It's a tough call. It's a much tougher, I think it's a much tougher case for everybody else. And I'm very unsure on all the officers. I'm very unsure because it's a way tougher call for them, I believe.
Okay.
I don't know. I would have to I think it's going to come down to the way the law is written, and how the jurors perceive it.
Right.
Yeah, so for me, so there was a moment in time where one of the officers asked Chauvin to if they should roll him over. So he asked if he should roll him over, asked about, excited delirium, in which, I mean, at that point they're trained to roll him on their side position, the side recovery position. Chauvin denies that, he says no or whatever. Then he asks him again, like, should we roll him over? And it's at that point where it's like, why not roll him on the side? At that point where it's beyond, that's where it gets beyond excessive. But I think even furthermore, so it's maybe a few seconds later where George Floyd is unconscious and he's still sitting there. I think at that point, that's where it's known for everyone, where it's like, this is completely 100% uncalled for. But for me personally, it was a little bit before then, when one of the other officers verbally said, should we roll him over? At that point, after anything beyond that is too much.
Yeah, I paid close attention during your jury selection, and you said something to the effect of that you thought this was the most historic case of your lifetime. Now that you've had a part in it, and you were able to also help determine the outcome, how do you look at that?
I still think it's a historic moment. Is it the most historic in my lifetime? I don't know anymore, only because there's still a lot of police violence. I couldn't have predicted the other things that have been going on over the past, month or so. I couldn't have predicted those things to happen. So I don't know if it's the most historic, but however, it is an extremely historic moment, and hopefully it pushes forth a lot of change.
You're sitting here, you shared your name, people know what you look like, and also they know your thoughts on this case and what this case should mean. Tell me just again what made you want to do this interview?
Yes, it's just as simple as I wanted to be able to give people of color, other black people like me, just a positive image, to know that change is possibly going to come. And I think it starts with this last trial, this last case. It's got to start there, and it starts with having these conversations publicly and being visible.
What was the last thing you said with the rest of the jurors before the deliberations ended?
I think the last thing I said was, I probably said something like, let's get a beer or something. I probably said, let's get a beer, let's get a drink. Just glad to be done. So yeah, we were celebrating. We all were very relieved when we were finished.
All right. Well, thank you so much for.
What's so deep about this stood out to me in listening to this face is that he was the only black man. And again, them selecting the jurors, they were still trying to do it in such a way that Chauvin would possibly get an out. And so what's left is whatever the judge is going to do. And I'm going to say this over and over. Say he throw the book at him. It does not suffice. One does not suffice. And there will not be change. They're coming to us again and again and asking the royal family, what way is acceptable to you to kill your own people at the end of the day? All right? Now, before we get into this last video, what I wanted also to add to the first video is we're seeing how the system is supposed to work. All right? And because it was so high profile and also they couldn't find a way out, they actually make themselves look even worse. But again and again, one does not suffice. So now we're going to listen to the full interview of the Attorney General.
Attorney General Ellison, congratulations on getting the verdict that the family of George Floyd and certainly many other people as well were looking for. First of all, you were in the courtroom when they read the guilty verdict.
Yes, sir.
Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Right.
What was the first thing that jumped into your head, your first thought and your first feeling?
Well, my first thought was relief. I did feel a sense of satisfaction because that was the goal we had. But I also, I felt a little somber too. You know, it's kind of like, wow, so we've gotten to the end, we've gotten to the top of the mountain. And, you know, George Floyd didn't bring him back to life, obviously. And of course, I looked over at Derek Chauvin and I knew that his life was going to change forever. Mm-hmm. And I think he should be held accountable, but there's no ignoring the human element of what's happening.
From that moment then, what was the first thing you said to George Floyd's family?
I just hugged him. I didn't say anything. Didn't say a word. Nothing needed to be said. No words could really capture how Philonis was feeling. He was in the courtroom too when the verdict was read. And you know, this is George Floyd's younger brother, and they grew up playing video games long after mom said go to bed. And you know, I think George Floyd was in many ways his kind of his big brother, his hero, who he looked up to, and knowing that there was accountability, that his brother's life did matter. The 12 people on a jury considered his brother's life to be important. I think that it was a very emotional moment for them.
You mentioned it doesn't bring George Floyd back, and I think that's, I'm sure you've talked with a lot of families of victims.
Victims, yeah.
And they look forward to the court process and they want to get justice.
Sure.
But at the same time, justice, closure isn't exactly a good way to put it for a lot of people
Sure.
because it doesn't bring their loved one back. What do you think the verdict means for George Floyd's family and for the state of Minnesota? Two different things.
Yeah, I think for the family, it means vindication of his humanity, that he was a person, that he deserved better, that Derek Chauvin should never have treated him that way. And I think that's what it means to them and much more. I think they're also very mindful of the fact that a lot of people like George Floyd, who are racial minorities, don't see accountability. Mm-hmm. They're aware of Rodney King. They're aware of what happened to Walter Scott. Laquan McDonald, his case wasn't brought until 4 years after it happened, even though it was pretty stark on video. And there are many other situations like that. So they're mindful of that situation. Mm-hmm. They're mindful of the fact that Breonna Taylor, nobody was ever held accountable for that, and to this moment. And so I think they see it in a larger historic context as well. What does it mean for our state? I think it's a step forward in terms of our idea of equal justice. Nobody's beneath the law. People like George Floyd are not beneath the law. And nobody's above the law. And it doesn't matter what your wealth or your position is. You can't just do whatever you want to whoever you want. You're going to have to step forward and answer.
You had a really interesting exchange on 60 Minutes about the element of race.
Yeah.
And was this a hate crime? Was it not a hate crime and so forth? Could you state what you believe was the racial element of this crime, these crimes,
right,
in this whole case?
Well, let me say what it wasn't first. We didn't have any evidence that anybody used a racial epithet in any way. We didn't have any evidence of that. We didn't present that. But that doesn't mean that our society, which for 250 years was a slaveholding society, well, for another 100 years after that was a Jim Crow society, and for 60 years we have disparities in every single aspect of American life. And it doesn't mean, what is, I think, racialized in this sense is that there is this history of African Americans engaging with law enforcement in a way that people feel over-policed and underprotected. In 1919, the first report on a clash between police and community took place in Chicago, 1919, Chicago race riots, is what they call it. Well, there was another such report in about 1935 in Harlem, another one in 1943 in Harlem. Then there was the Kerner Commission in 1968. And then after that, there was the Christopher Commission after Rodney King. Well, there was the Commission on the 21st Century Policing after Ferguson, which Obama did. We have this history of horrible interactions, you know, unfortunate incidents. Maybe there's social unrest, maybe there's not. Usually then, you know, folks and politicians and folks study it. And then, sadly, we've seen a lack of action and follow through. And I think now, I really feel like the country's in a mood for real follow through. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has already passed through the House. Senators are talking about giving it a vote in the Senate. We've seen budgets in the Minneapolis Police Department. We've seen more money go to upstream solutions like crime prevention program. I mean, I think that we could be at a point of departure from the past. I'm not saying that we are. I'm saying that we have a chance to be, and that there seems to be a lot of people on a multiracial basis who feel that these changes are needed. You know, so.
All right. Well, let's back up for a second. Just briefly tell me, how did you get this case?
My friend Mike Freeman said, hey, would you partner with me on the case? I said, sure. And then my other friend, Governor Walz, whom I served 12 years in the Congress with, said, hey, would you be involved in this case? And I said, hey man, when the people have needs, we're gonna step up and try to meet them. And so we said yes to that. And so I ended up being appointed the lead prosecutor, but Mike Freeman was there right along the way. I talked to Mike every Wednesday morning about the case, and he and I chopped up ideas. His team, great people on his staff, Gene Burdorf, Josh Larson, were a part of our integrated team, together with some folks we had at the AG's office, together with some folks we brought in who were special appointments that I made.
Would Freeman's office have ever charged the other three officers?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, but I know.
So let me phrase it this way. Did anyone from Freeman's office say that they would not charge the other three officers or did not want to charge the other three officers?
Lou, I would not disclose a private conversation. But I will say that we believe there's probable cause for them to be charged. I can't really talk about those cases. Those gentlemen are presumed innocent, they have a right to a fair trial, and I take it upon myself to make sure they get one.
The second-degree murder charge came after you took over the case.
Right, and so did the other charges.
Would Freeman's office have charged that second-degree murder charge?
You know, I'm not going to disclose a private conversation. I'll say that Mike Freeman was on board with the charges that were brought and was a full partner and was really critical to the outcome, and he deserves a lot of credit.
Perhaps part of what makes these cases more complicated is these laws don't seem to be written with the thought that officers are going to be charged with killing civilians, and so sometimes that makes it more complicated when deciding what charge fits. Whose idea was it to bring in the second-degree murder charge and lay out, you know, that, hey, this looks like it would fit these circumstances?
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't be able to disclose our internal process, so I wouldn't name an individual. I will say this. Judge Cahill looked at whether there was probable cause to support all these defendants and all these charges, and the only one he let go of was the third-degree murder, and the Court of Appeals required that one be restored. So everything we charged, there was probable cause for it. Every one we charged, there was probable cause to charge.
Did you feel vindicated, particularly with the second-degree murder being the one that had not been charged before?
Right. Well, I tell you, I walk into this with no sense of pride. I'm a public servant, and I mean that sincerely. And so we just wanted to do justice, and we didn't want to overcharge the case, and we didn't want to undercharge the case. We wanted to make sure that the charges fit. Our theory with Derek Chauvin is that he committed an assault of third degree on George Floyd, and George Floyd died as a result of that assault, which made it a second-degree unintentional murder. The jury agreed that was accurate, and they and they believed it was proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
What was the biggest obstacle to getting the conviction?
The fact that people are just, we're all raised, all of us, to think the very best about a member of the police department. Mm-hmm. You know, we grew up watching Law and Order. We, you know, old show reruns of Dragnet or the Mod Squad, or I mean, we're conditioned to trust police officers. What do you, if you get lost and you're a little kid, what does your mom tell you to do? Look for a police officer. And so we had to overcome the idea that even someone who is held in high esteem in our society can commit a crime. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, what was our biggest obstacle. And so the evidence that of the case to me was there, but people's the cultural weight of what that badge means to people. Look, even the people on the scene who were screaming, check his pulse, get off of him, even those people, you know who they called? They called the police, mm-hmm. on the police. So that, I think, was our biggest barrier.
Sure. Why did you decide to call in outside prosecutors like Jerry Blackwell and Steve Slicher?
Well, you know, when Attorney General Skip Humphrey was the Attorney General, he had a criminal division that had you know, double digits of criminal prosecutors. Our office personnel has shrank over the years, mm-hmm. and so we just needed more help. You know, all the other criminal cases we have, they're still here, they're still going on, mm-hmm. and there's about 7 or 8 counties that could handle a murder in Minnesota, but there's 87 counties. So for those other 80 counties who rely on us for criminal appeals and for prosecuting, you know, homicides, you know, that those didn't go away, mm-hmm. you know, and so we needed help. And also, Steve Slicher, Jerry Blackwell, Neil Katyal, and Lola Velasquez are just great lawyers, man. Mm-hmm. They're just like good at what they do, and our people are good at what they do. I mean, I'm very proud of our staff, but you know, Jerry and Steve and Lola and Neil are extraordinary. Neil Katyal is the former U.S. Solicitor General. I mean, the guy knows a thing or two about appeals. You know, Lola Velasquez, expert in the law of medical practice, mm-hmm. understands that very, very well. Jerry had a team at his firm that chimed in too. You know, a really talented lawyer named Mary Young and Corey Gordon, very smart. So we got a lot of help from a lot of places. The world saw 4 lawyers stand up and give it and do opening and closings and examine witnesses, but we had a lot of folks other than that helping to make this thing happen.
Now, this type of situation has been put together before with results that were not as successful as this, and the phrase, too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
How do you avoid that? How do you make sure these are all talented people, but also proud people, and how do you put people like this together and make sure that it's a team and you're going to achieve the result you want?
Well, that's where leadership comes in. And there's really only one cook. Al's the head chef. And you know, I never had to, and look, we had a group of people who challenged each other all the time. Mm-hmm. And we said, egos, leave them out the door. We know all of you guys are awesome. You know, you're awesome. And then we gave people a sphere in which they could exercise their own leadership. So nobody really messed with Steve and Matt on the use of force case. Mm-hmm. Nobody messed around with Jerry and Corey and Mary and Lola on the medical case. I mean, the bottom line is they were able to. I was not micromanaging anyone. You know, my theory of leadership is you get the very best people you possibly can, and then you let them do their job, and you keep them organized and in their lane, and everybody has to be able to lead. And that means, so on the medical case, this is your thing. Do that, you know. And so on the use of force case, that's your sphere. And so we got people opportunities to lead, and we got people opportunities to work as a team. And I was very hands-on, never missed a meeting, stayed very involved. And so everybody was clear on that the AG was going to have the last word on things. And so it worked.
Derek Chauvin get a fair trial?
Yes.
Absolutely. Different circumstances in most cases. All the jurors knew something about this case going into it.
Right. But nobody could be on the jury unless they could be impartial. And I want to commend Judge Cahill for being very clear about that. There was a time when the settlement news broke,
yep.
And he called him in and said, who heard about this, who was influenced by this? 2 people said they were. And
Did you know about the settlement ahead of time?
No. But I mean, look, I knew that they had retained counsel. I knew they were, I assumed that
Eric Nelson came this close to making an allegation in court of conspiracy between you and your son on the city council. So that's, Well, look, I love my son, and we are close, but we know what to talk about and what not to talk about, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Yeah. So, it's just the way it is. One last question. This was seen worldwide because there were cameras in the courts. You opposed the cameras in the courts in multiple motions.
Yeah, I did.
Did you change your mind at all as it played out?
I came to see, that's one thing I'll say that I moved my opinion on. Mm-hmm. Now, another reason to give Judge Cahill some credit, he did not require the minors to be on camera. That was one of the big things that worried me. Witnesses just being intimidated because they're not trying to be world famous. They didn't seek this, they didn't want this. The whole Cato Caitlin phenomenon, right? But he was flexible, and so that was important, and it ended up to having a good effect overall. I guess I am glad that the world saw it. I think the public does see the trial as having been conducted in a fair way, and so I think that we're better off for that.
Yeah, that would have been another way out as far as I'm concerned. So that's what I should have asked in the beginning. Did Derek Chauvin get a fair trial? We got a much deeper look with the prosecutors. We have heard from one juror and one alternate, and then also the Attorney General on this. And I talk about being bone weary, that they did everything right pretty much to a large extent, but I could see some flaws in it that we can pick apart and, do your thing. But we still got other trials, and 9 times out of 10, they gonna get away with it. And they'll profit from it and all those things, Amber Geiger right now trying to get her shit thrown out completely. And tell these people, don't look at us as humans in America. They really don't. And so we should not get all overjoyed and all that. You might get an inkling of satisfaction for that one particular. But then, again, look at the broader scope. What they continue to do to us in America. They're always trying to find some kind of way to damage us. And they did damage us in this case. They know what they're doing, the media doing. And then they're analyzing everything that's coming out of these black men's mouths, and also a white lawyer too as well, and saying, okay, we got to learn how to tweak this in such a way. Because trust and believe, if they would have found a way out for him, he would have walked. So it is what it is, my royal family. I know it's a very long video, so render your voice with your beautiful divine words. And it's always, my royal family, I thank you for your love. I thank you for your support. And with that said, Ashe.